It is hard to ask for help, especially when it's for your child. It can make you feel like you're not doing enough, or you're very stuck and you can't provide for your child. It definitely takes an impact on your mental health. It's heartbreaking sometimes.
I've never done a study where other questions haven't emerged because you haven't thought about it in that way. Somebody says something or they relate an experience that indicates that, oh right, I really never thought about that, and is that happening elsewhere? Is that a big problem or a little problem, or is it just the one case? So it's curiosity that drives research, and thinking about, again, from a public health perspective, like not accepting things that seem to be going backwards, which is what it feels like at the moment. I felt like I was watching a train crash happening because of the extent to which food banks were featured in the press, and how there just seemed to be more and more discussion of it, and then a discussion of it as being an indicative of the problem in its own right, but also knowing at the same time, from my knowledge of the academic literature, particularly from North America, that actually what we were probably seeing was the tip of the iceberg.
Flora reached out to me years ago, actually. I think she stumbled across some of my earliest research on how food insecurity was impacting infant feeding. But more recently, we sort of struck up a relationship online, and with some other folks in Scotland that were doing more work as advocacy work on the ground, connected to community organizations that were stepping up to help families cope.
We put a bag together for them to take into hospital, which includes all the toiletries, pads, nighties, pyjamas, dressing gowns.
So we provide underprivileged families, local to Aberdeen and Shire, with items to help look after their babies and children. So things like nappies, formula milk, all the way through to clothing and equipment. For a lot of our families that we support, they were already in challenging circumstances. Then we got hit with COVID and then the cost of living crisis. So it's just exacerbated everything. This crisis wasn't a new thing to most of our families, but it's certainly made their crisis even worse. So yeah, our families are definitely feeling the pinch even more now.
Listening to Flora talk about her research, I'm like, that the exact same thing is what's happening in Canada. Families are struggling, families with young children in particular. It's a time of life when there's often more expenses than you might anticipate, and with the cost of living pressures that people are experiencing in both countries, we're starting to see some really frightening outcomes in the lives of families with young children.
I think this is a problem that has been, I suppose, hiding in plain sight for a good while. The overall picture in terms of food inflation, for example, and other costs of living indicate that it's a problem that's getting worse. Since they've been presenting the results to policymakers at Scottish Government and locally here in the North East, to follow up on some of the questions I've raised through the conclusions finding from the research. And actually, I'd like to see more focused research on the experiences of very young families, and how we can, and again, to see the impact of any monetary interventions, both locally and nationally. The understanding about particularly maternal and infant food insecurity, and understanding its impact on healthcare use and also on health itself directly for the individuals involved. So that would be my next steps.